Welcome to this new automotive news video. It's Wednesday, May 6, 2026, and today we're going to talk about BMW pulling a Titanic on us. The brand is clearly sinking, but the captain of the ship is trying to make us believe that everything is fine. Yet the figures for the first quarter of 2026 are very clear. The brand is sinking deeper into a full-blown crisis. We'll also talk about Opel, which has just unveiled its Corsa GSE, the supposedly affordable sporty version that's neither sporty nor really affordable. We'll also talk about Ford, which is getting ready to sell its European factories, and Nissan, which is making somewhat similar announcements. It's closing a factory and laying off workers in Europe. Everything is just perfect in their world. These are the topics of this video for Wednesday, May 6, 2026. I hope you'll find it interesting. If you do, as always, I count on you to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, boosting this one if the option appears for you, and of course by leaving a comment where you share your thoughts on today's news. And before we get into the topics listed for this video, I'm adding a little news update for you, a bit of additional news actually. Remember, a few weeks ago we talked about the electric Mercedes C-Class that had just been unveiled. Mercedes announced that the entry-level version would have 489 horsepower, an 800-volt architecture that allows for a maximum fast charging speed of 330 kilowatt, a WLTP range of 750 km made possible by a large 94 kW battery. Technologically and technically, it's one of the best electric cars European brands offer. Back then, I concluded this topic in a video by explaining that everything would come down to the price. If this car was sold for less than 60,000 euros, there was really an opportunity to seize. The prices have just been adjusted, but they are still significantly higher. We're talking about an entry-level version at 66,000 euros, with trims and versions that can go up to 77,000 euros. And at that price, it's very hard to find selling points for it. That's 10,000 euros more than the gasoline version, which is admittedly less powerful, but can probably go over 800 real-world kilometers on the highway with a full tank of gas that takes barely 2 minutes to fill. But especially compared to other EVs, it's not that impressive, even next to its European rivals. BMW, on the other hand, with its i3 offers entry-level prices around 60,000 euros with 900 km of range and an even faster charging speed. If we look beyond European brands, we find Tesla with its Model 3, which also offers 750 km range, with a slightly lower charging speed at 250 kWh, but it's sold for 20,000 euros less. It's very expensive, and some people justify this high price by saying that Mercedes is trying to regain its premium status. Why not, if Mercedes is clearly playing the game and offers exceptional interior finishes with high-quality materials? The latest S-Class models, meant to be top-tier, have many plastic parts that creak and feel hollow despite their supposed build quality. You have to wonder what to expect from this Mercedes model, which will clearly be below the top range and unfortunately might be considered high-end only because of its price. So, we were talking about BMW a few moments ago, and that's going to be the main topic of this video. BMW just announced its figures for the first quarter of 2026. Almost all the indicators are in the red. Yet the CEO and the board of directors of BMW claim that everything is fine and that everything is under control. Yet profits for this first quarter of 2026 have dropped by 33% down to 1.27 billion euros. To be clear, 1 billion euros is still good, but BMW's golden age is over. Revenue has been revised downward by 8%. To 31 billion euros, which is largely due to the fact that the group's overall sales have dropped significantly by 3.5%, with 565,000 units sold, and margins have fallen from 6.9%. Already not very high for a manufacturer that's supposed to be premium, at only 5%. Remember a few years ago, people used to make fun of Peugeot when they had a 5% margin. Now, when BMW has a 5% margin, we're at the point where we think it's actually not that bad. The problem for BMW, just like for the other German brands, is that its two main markets are slipping away. The first market, China, we've known for a long time that it's going to be very complicated for BMW with the shift to all-electric. You can compete with brands like BYD, which sometimes offer an electric car at half the price compared to a BMW, capable of the same things on paper. Meanwhile, in the United States, BMW remains at a disadvantage due to tariffs, and in Europe, you still need to spend 39,000 euros to get the entry-level model. Needless to say, that's out of reach for most people these days. On top of all that, there's more bad news for BMW, which last year prided itself on doing pretty well in the electric car market compared to other German giants like Audi, Mercedes, or Porsche. Well, in the end, things haven't been going so well since the beginning of 2026, since BMW's global electric car sales have dropped by about 20%, reaching 90,000 units, and now only represent 15% of the market share. Whereas throughout 2025, even after the end of electric car subsidies in the United States, it had managed to stay well above 20%. So all the indicators are in the red, but BMW's management is trying to be reassuring, explaining that they simply expected things to be worse. So maybe things will eventually pick up for the rest of 2026, but you still have to wonder a little bit by what magic. Because yes, indeed, BMW will come out again, receive several new models in its lineup, but not a single one is even remotely affordable. The new 7 Series, the flagship model, is due in 2026. The new i3 and the new entry-level version of the X3 are both cars that will still cost over 60,000 euros. Speaking of completely unreasonable prices, let's talk about Opel, which is unveiling its Corsa GSE, the supposedly sporty and supposedly affordable version of the Corsa. In terms of performance, Opel announces 280 horsepower in the all-electric version, which allows it to go from 0 to 100 in 5.5 seconds. It's not bad, but it's not particularly impressive for an electric car, especially since to take advantage of those 280 horsepower, you'll absolutely have to drive in sport mode. Because in normal mode, it will only have, quote-unquote, 230 horsepower and even less in eco mode. As for top speed, it's 180 in sport mode and 150 in the other two modes. That's not that high for a sporty car that can be used on a track. It's going to get the 54 kW battery from the Lancia Ypsilon HF. For now, Opel hasn't announced its final range, but the Lancia Y has the same motor with the same battery and gets just under 420 kilometers on the WLTP cycle, just to give you an idea. So the Corsa GSE isn't all bad either. Indeed, visually, Opel has tried to give this version a slightly sportier look, with 18-inch rims fitted with Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires, wider tracks, bumpers, and side skirts. A bit more aggressive too, a black roof, and a slightly larger rear spoiler. Also a small detail that's pretty cool visually, the yellow brake calipers and the little GSC strips placed on the side skirts. And on the chassis side, there are some good news too, since it will have a sport chassis with a specific suspension, reinforced braking, which will definitely be necessary when you know the car will probably weigh between 1,550 and 1,600 kilograms, a firmer steering than the standard model, and above all, the Torsen limited slip differential. Even inside, Opel went for a sporty look with bucket seats, Alcantara, a sport aluminum pedal set, and yellow seat belts, matching the color of the brake calipers. All that comes at a price, 23,000 euros. Let me know in the comments what you think, but I'm not sure this car checks the boxes for a real sports car sold at a reasonable price. We're still far from the original GTI spirit. Let me remind you that in 2018, within the same group Stellantis, you could get a Peugeot 208 GTI for almost half the price. It was a bit less powerful with 210 horsepower, but it was also 500 kg lighter, and also benefited from the Torsen differential and the full sports chassis package. To wrap up, we'll share two similar news items. Ford is currently selling one of its European factories, specifically the one in Valencia, Spain, to a Chinese brand, Geely, which you might not know very well yet, but it's gradually making its way into Europe and is counting on this factory to assemble its cars directly in Europe and avoid customs duties. It will be a bit of a win-win deal because Ford is looking to reduce most of its investments in Europe. And on the other hand, we have Nissan, whose European factories aren't doing so well either. This also concerns Spain. Not only that, as you'll see, but indeed, Nissan is announcing the elimination of 900 additional jobs in Europe, with a large part of them in Spain, probably more than a third of the 900 jobs that are set to disappear. And then in England, things aren't going well either, because in its most well-known factory, the one in Sunderland, where Nissan assembles the Nissan Leaf, the Juke, and the latest generation Qashqai, the brand is also gradually packing up and leaving. So we'll see how far this goes, but indeed, they have just merged two of their production lines, which should allow them, first, to continue producing enough units of their models, and second, to free up a production line, which should eventually be sold to a Chinese brand. We're discussing Chery Group brands, especially JQ and Omoda, which are growing rapidly in the UK and planning to assemble several models there, though the exact location isn't known yet. And apparently it would be this factory that's being targeted more specifically, since negotiations about this are already underway. And I'll add a little news for you about electric cars in England. In England, electric car sales are increasing. They've reached about 23% market share since the beginning. Since the start of the year, that's technically 20% more than the same period last year. Experts estimate that the market share should reach about 26% by the end of the year if the transition keeps up the pace it has had for the past few months. The problem is that it's still far from the targets set by the British government, which are 33%. This situation is causing a lot of concern for brands that continue to produce and sell in England, because if they fail to meet their targets, and that's probably what's going to happen, they will all have to pay a fine of £15,000 per missing car needed to reach those famous targets. For most brands, this means fines of several tens of millions of euros, which is pushing some manufacturers to simply limit the number of internal combustion cars they will agree to sell in order to artificially increase their share of electric cars, which means fewer cars sold, fewer cars to produce, and car factories like Nissan's that will continue to struggle and will unfortunately, little by little, probably end up handing over parts of their facilities to even more Chinese brands. Anyway, that's the overview. For today's news, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did as usual, please show your support by leaving a like, subscribing, and maybe even supporting the channel by clicking the join button. I'll see you tomorrow for the next video. Bye.